Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be tackling a question that's as fantastical as it is thought-provoking. What if humans could fly? And I'm not talking about planes or jetpacks. What if we could fly like birds, with our own power?
It's a question that really captures the imagination.
Yeah.
And it forces us to consider the implications not just for our bodies, but for our entire society.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here to do today. We're taking the source material you, our listeners, provided as a launching pad for this wild thought experiment.
We'll be exploring how this one change, as impossible as it might seem, could completely reshape our world. From politics to urban planning to even our own biology.
So much to unpack. I'm excited to dive in. Let's start with the most obvious impact, politics.
Yeah.
What happens to borders and governments when anyone can just fly across them?
Well, the concept of a nation-state, with its clearly defined territory and borders, kind of becomes practically obsolete.
Obsolete, wow.
Yeah, think about it. What use is a wall or a fence when your neighbor can just flap their wings and fly right over?
Passports and visas would suddenly seem a little pointless, wouldn't they?
Exactly. It challenges the very foundation of how we organize ourselves politically. We might see a shift towards more decentralized power structures. Maybe city-states or regional alliances become more important than national governments.
So instead of pledging allegiance to a country, you might pledge allegiance to your city or even your neighborhood.
It's a possibility. Governance might become much more localized, focused on managing resources and cooperation within a specific flying range, rather than controlling vast territories.
Okay, so much more localized. But wouldn't that also lead to a ton of new challenges? Like, how do you enforce laws when everyone's zipping around in 3 dimensions?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
We need to rethink law enforcement from the ground up. Imagine air patrols, maybe even specialized sky police, trained to handle aerial crime and ensure the safety of those flying below.
And forget about car chases.
Right.
We're talking high-flying pursuits through the clouds. Okay, that movie practically writes itself. But it's not just about catching criminals, right? We'd need a whole new system for managing air traffic. Think about rush hour, but in the sky.
Oh, absolutely. We'd need incredibly sophisticated air traffic control systems, maybe even designated flight paths and altitude restrictions to prevent collisions and chaos.
So it'd be like the current air traffic control system, but on steroids, managing millions of individual flyers instead of just planes.
Exactly.
Wow, okay. That brings up another fascinating point. How would cities themselves change? We can't exactly keep building outward when everyone can fly.
That's where things get really interesting from an urban planning perspective. We'd likely see a rise in vertical cities, but not just skyscrapers like we have now. Imagine entire communities stacked on top of each other, connected by sky bridges and aerial walkways.
It's like those sci-fi movies with flying cars, but it's us doing the flying.
Exactly.
That's so cool. And what about rural areas? They could suddenly become much more accessible.
Absolutely. The traditional divide between urban and rural areas could shrink dramatically. People could live in more remote, scenic locations and easily fly to urban centers for work or leisure. Commuting wouldn't be limited to highways and public transportation anymore.
So someone could live in a cabin in the mountains and fly to their office job in the city. No more traffic jams.
Exactly. It would revolutionize where we choose to live and how we think about the concept of location. Proximity to work or amenities wouldn't be as big of a factor.
Okay, let's zoom in on the individual for a moment. If we're all flying around, how would that affect our bodies, our health? Would everyone be super fit from all that flapping?
Our physiology would definitely adapt. We'd need stronger chest and back muscles to power our flight, and our bones might become lighter and more hollow, like birds, to reduce overall weight.
So we wouldn't necessarily look like bodybuilders, but we'd definitely be strong and agile.
Right. And our cardiovascular systems would get a serious workout, which could have positive implications for heart health.
But flying takes a ton of energy. Would we have to eat constantly to fuel all that aerial activity?
Our metabolism would likely evolve to become much more efficient at converting food into energy. We might even develop specialized organs for storing energy, similar to how migratory birds store fat before long journeys.
So picture this, a world where everyone's got a bit more upper body strength, leaner physiques, and we're all snacking on energy bars throughout the day to fuel our flights.
It definitely challenges our preconceived notions of what a human body is capable of.
It's a pretty wild image. And it's not just our physical abilities that would change our culture, our art, even our understanding of ourselves would be transformed by this newfound ability to take to the skies.
Absolutely.
Well, we've just scratched the surface of the political, urban, and even biological changes in a world where humans can fly. But let's not forget about the potential downsides. What are some of the challenges we might face?
That's a crucial point. While there are many exciting possibilities, we also need to consider the potential negative consequences. For example, what about the environmental impact of so many humans flying around? And how do we ensure that everyone has equal access to this ability, regardless of their physical abilities or financial resources?
Those are some big questions we need to grapple with as we continue our exploration. We've got a lot more ground, or should I say air, to cover, so stay tuned.
Welcome back. As we continue exploring this world of winged humanity, it's fascinating to consider how our culture and social interactions might evolve.
It really makes you think, like, what would happen to art and entertainment? Would we see a surge in aerial dance performances, sky-high sculptures, or maybe even music that captures the feeling of soaring through the clouds?
Oh, absolutely. Art would undoubtedly reflect this new dimension of human experience. We could see a whole new genre of literature emerge, with stories about aerial adventures, flying societies, or even love stories that unfold against the backdrop of a sunset sky.
Oh, I definitely read those. But wouldn't our everyday social interactions change as well? Like, would it be rude to fly over someone's house without permission? Or would we need new rules for aerial greetings? Instead of waving, we do a little wing flutter.
It's fascinating to think about how etiquette would adapt. We'd probably develop norms for aerial right-of-way, noise regulations for those who like to whoop and holler while flying, maybe even designated no-fly zones for privacy.
Speaking of privacy, wouldn't it be hard to get away from people if they can just fly over to your balcony for a chat?
Yeah, the concept of personal space would take on a whole new meaning. We might see a rise in demand for homes with rooftop gardens or secluded aerial platforms, places where people can retreat from the hustle and bustle of the skyways.
Imagine trying to relax in your backyard and suddenly your neighbor swoops in for a surprise visit.
Exactly. It would require a whole new set of social cues and boundaries. We might even see the development of architectural features designed to enhance privacy in a world of flying humans.
Okay, this is making me think about the darker side of things. What about crime? Could you imagine a world with flying criminals? It'd be like a real-life superhero comic.
It's a sobering thought. Law enforcement would need to adapt dramatically. We'd likely see specialized units trained for aerial pursuit, maybe even airborne prisons for those who violate airspace laws.
Wow, a prison in the sky. That's both terrifying and kind of awesome.
And think about the technology. We'd need advanced surveillance systems to track aerial crime, maybe even weapons designed for non-lethal takedowns in the air. It would push the boundaries of forensics and criminal justice.
Okay, let's shift gears for a moment and think about the positive global impact. Travel and cultural exchange would be completely revolutionized, right?
Absolutely. Imagine a world where you can experience different cultures firsthand, visit ancient ruins on a whim, or even just pop over to another continent for a weekend getaway. The possibilities for tourism and cultural exchange would be limitless.
It'd be like having the whole world as your backyard. But hold on, not everyone might have the same opportunities to fly, right? What about people with disabilities or those who can't afford personal flight gear?
That's a crucial point to consider. We need to ensure that this ability to fly doesn't create a new form of inequality. What about people with physical limitations? Those who are afraid of heights, or those who simply can't afford the training or equipment?
So we need to think about accessibility and affordability, just like we do with other forms of transportation.
Exactly. Maybe there could be government-subsidized flight programs or public flight schools to make this ability accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or physical capabilities.
That's a great idea. Everyone deserves a chance to experience the freedom of flight.
And it's not just about individual access. We'd also need to consider the impact on wildlife, especially birds. How would their habitats and migration patterns be affected by millions of humans sharing the skies?
That's a good point. We wouldn't want to create a sky so crowded that it disrupts natural ecosystems.
Right. We'd need to strike a balance between human freedom and environmental responsibility. Maybe designated bird sanctuaries or no-fly zones could help mitigate the impact.
It sounds like we'd need a whole new set of rules and regulations, not just for humans, but for protecting the environment as well.
Exactly. This hypothetical scenario really highlights how interconnected everything is. One seemingly simple change, like humans being able to fly, has ripple effects across every aspect of society, from our social interactions to our relationship with the natural world.
So far, we've imagined a world where humans evolved to have the ability to fly. But what if, instead of it being a natural ability, we achieved flight through technology? Would that lead to a different set of challenges and opportunities?
That's a brilliant question. It shifts the conversation from biology to engineering and raises a whole new set of fascinating questions about access, regulation, and even the ethics of artificial flight.
Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and consider how humans might actually achieve flight, whether it's through natural evolution or technological advancements. What are some possibilities?
Let's explore both avenues. If we're talking about natural evolution, our wings would likely be a unique structure, something adapted specifically for human physiology and the demands of sustained flight.
So we wouldn't necessarily be flapping around like giant pigeons.
Probably not. Our wingspan and muscle structure would need to be optimized for our body weight and proportions. We might have more powerful chest and back muscles to power our flight, and our bones might be lighter and more hollow, like birds, to reduce overall weight.
Okay, I'm starting to get a visual here. But what about the energy demands of flight? Would we need to eat like a ton of food to fuel all that flapping?
Our metabolism would likely be different as well. We might have a more efficient way of converting food into energy, and we might even develop specialized organs for storing energy reserves, similar to how birds store fat before long migrations.
So maybe instead of 3 meals a day, we'd be constantly grazing on high-energy snacks to keep ourselves airborne.
It's possible. Our dietary needs would certainly change to accommodate the energy demands of flight.
Okay, so natural evolution is one possibility. But what about the tech route? How could technology help us achieve flight?
Well, we're already seeing advancements in areas like personal jetpacks and wingsuits, which could be stepping stones towards more sophisticated personal flight devices.
Right, like those videos you see online of people base jumping with wingsuits. It's incredible.
Exactly. But to achieve sustained independent flight, we'd need significant breakthroughs in areas like propulsion systems, lightweight materials, and energy storage.
And what about safety? Flying around with a jetpack strapped to your back seems pretty risky.
Safety would be paramount. We'd need to develop sophisticated navigation systems, collision avoidance technology, and rigorous training programs to ensure the safety of both flyers and those on the ground. Imagine a world where driver's education includes aerial maneuvers and airspace regulations.
Driver's ed in the sky. That's a whole new level of teenage rebellion waiting to happen. But seriously, the technology involved would be mind-blowing.
Absolutely. We'd need to combine expertise from aerospace engineering, material science, computer science, and even biology to create safe, efficient, and accessible personal flight devices.
And let's not forget about the environmental impact. Would these devices be powered by fossil fuels, or could we develop sustainable energy sources for flight?
That's a critical consideration. Ideally, we develop flight technologies that are powered by renewable energy sources such as solar or wind power.
Imagine solar-powered wings that collect energy while you fly, or maybe we could even harness the wind, like birds do, to help us stay aloft.
Those are great ideas. Biomimicry, which is the practice of learning from and mimicking nature's designs, could play a major role in developing sustainable flight technologies.
So whether we evolve to have wings or invent amazing flight devices, it seems like there's a lot to consider beyond just the mechanics of getting airborne.
Absolutely. The implications of human flight, whether natural or artificial, are vast and multifaceted.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the social and cultural impacts to the technological challenges and the ethical considerations. But there's one final piece of the puzzle we need to explore: the political and economic ramifications of a flying world.
And those are arguably the most complex and potentially disruptive aspects of this whole thought experiment. Stay tuned as we delve into the world of airborne politics and the economics of flight.
We're back, ready to tackle the final frontier in our flying humans thought experiment: politics and economics. I'm really curious to see how these massive systems would adapt to a change this big.
It's definitely where things get interesting, and maybe a little unsettling. As we mentioned earlier, the idea of a nation-state built on fixed borders kind of starts to fall apart when people can just fly over those borders.
So do countries just disappear? Do we all become citizens of the world, living in some kind of borderless utopia?
It's not necessarily about countries vanishing overnight, but it's a huge shift in how we see and organize ourselves. The old idea of territorial sovereignty, where a government controls a specific area, that becomes really hard to maintain.
Yeah, I can see that. What's the point of defending a border when anyone can just fly right over it?
Exactly. We might see new political groups forming, based on shared ideas instead of location, like overlapping networks or alliances that go beyond traditional borders.
So instead of countries with lines on a map, we'd have more fluid political structures, almost like floating communities, connected by values or goals.
That's a great way to put it. Governance might become more decentralized, focusing on managing resources and cooperation within a specific airspace, rather than controlling huge amounts of land. Imagine city-states having more power, negotiating air routes and trade deals with each other.
Okay, so politically, things get a lot more complex, more interconnected. But what about the economy? How would businesses and industries adapt to a world with everyone flying around?
Get ready, because the economic landscape would change dramatically. Some industries would face huge challenges, like think about car manufacturers, traditional airlines, even public transportation. Their whole business model is built on the limitations of traveling on the ground.
Yeah, why would you sit in traffic when you could just fly? Hard to imagine those industries surviving if they don't change.
They'd have to adapt super fast or risk becoming obsolete. But on the other hand, totally new industries would appear. The need for personal flight gear, wingsuits, jetpacks, all that stuff would skyrocket.
So instead of car dealerships, we'd have personal flight equipment stores, selling wings and high-tech jetpacks. I can already picture the futuristic ads.
And don't forget the support industries that would pop up. We'd need specialized mechanics to fix all that equipment, flight instructors to teach people how to fly, and a whole new kind of air traffic control to manage all the traffic in the sky.
It'd be like the early days of the automobile, but instead of cars, it's all about wings and jet propulsion.
Exactly. And as the technology gets better, we might even have special flight suits with navigation systems, communication devices, even weather sensors built in.
Wow, it sounds like a dream come true for tech people. But wouldn't all that new tech be really expensive? What about people who can't afford to fly?
That's a super important point. The cost of all this tech, especially at the beginning, would probably be out of reach for a lot of people. We could end up with a society where only the rich can fly and everyone else is stuck on the ground. It's a classic example of how technology, while amazing, can also make inequality worse.
So how do we stop that from happening? How do we make sure everyone has a chance to fly, no matter how much money they have?
It would take a real team effort. Governments, businesses, and individuals working together to make flying accessible and affordable. Think public flight programs like public transportation, where people could rent or lease flight gear at a lower cost.
Like a flying bus or train. That's a great idea.
Exactly. We might even see community flight co-ops where people share the cost of buying and maintaining equipment.
Sounds like we'd need some really creative solutions. But let's zoom out for a second and think about the bigger economic picture. How would trade and global commerce be affected by all this flying?
It would change global trade completely. Imagine goods being delivered by individual flyers. No more big cargo planes or slow trucks.
So instead of waiting weeks for a package, a flying courier could bring it to your door in hours.
Exactly. Everything would move so much faster and more efficiently. Remote communities would have access to more products and services, and global supply chains would become way more flexible.
It's amazing to think about how quickly things could move around the world. But wouldn't all this also shake things up for existing businesses and economies?
Oh, absolutely. Systems that rely on ground transportation would have to adapt or be left behind. Shipping companies, trucking companies, even the postal service. Their roles would have to change.
It shows how progress has both good and bad sides. New opportunities pop up, but old systems get disrupted, and sometimes it's tough.
That's the key, isn't it? To use these advancements for good while minimizing the harm. It takes planning, collaboration, and a willingness to rethink how we do things, both in politics and economics.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, or should I say air, in this deep dive. From borderless skies to the economics of flying, it's clear that this ability would change everything.
We've looked at the good and the bad, the possibilities and the problems. One thing's for sure. The idea of humans flying, whether naturally or with technology, makes us question what's possible and imagine a future that's both exciting and a little scary.
It's been an incredible journey. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with a sense of wonder at what humans can achieve and a renewed appreciation for how interconnected our world really is.
So as you go about your day, dear listener, maybe you'll look up at the sky and see it differently, thinking about the possibilities and the challenges of a world where the sky's the limit.